would never say what you've said to me. I have had sex. And honestly, Jesus still loves me. From obviously how you feel, me in a windmill, you probably want to leave.
Say what?
Yeah. I in a windmill. And guess what? We did it a second time.
Oh, it was the windmill comment heard around Bachelor Nation, and I am so here for it. What an episode of The Bachelorette on Monday night, you guys. I'm Lauren Zima. Welcome to Roses and Rose Live. And to discuss this landmark, iconic, unforgettable episode and specifically moment of The Bachelorette, I am joined now by Nick Viall. He is, I would say, one of the foremost and most experienced voices in Bachelor Nation, having been The Bachelor on The Bachelorette twice and a Bachelor in Paradise alum as well. He is the host of the fabulous podcast, The Viall Files. Nick, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Thank you for Skyping in from your home, from your home with the fam for the 4th.
I am. It's my sister's home. I'm in my nephew's bedroom.
So, Nick, we just watched the clip. I mean, when you are watching Hannah at the end of Monday night's episode reveal to the world, say to Luke, I effed in a windmill, and then I did it a second time. Being someone who's watched this show for years and been on the shows, what's your just reaction to that moment playing out on TV?
Great for Hannah. Good for her. Listen, I like that the show each season continues to be willing to show more authenticity and kind of realness when it comes to some of these relationships. I know obviously with my time on the show, when the discussion of sex came up, that was kind of new for the franchise. But they've done a good job of continuing to kind of push the limits and bring those conversations as part of the show. I mean, several years ago, there was no mention of sex or intimacy at all. And I think people are appreciating kind of being able to see that as it goes on. So.
Right? I mean, that is such an interesting point. And we had talked to I did a phoner with Chris Harrison, and he talked about how this season really is intersecting sex and religion like never before. Would you agree? What do you think? New ground?
I do, and I think it's great, and I give Hannah a lot of credit for being willing to talk about both. I think it's very easy for people, and especially cast members, to almost feel like they have to pick a side. Do they want to sound progressive and be sex positive, or do they want to sound religious and conservative? And I think Hannah's doing a great job of showing that you don't necessarily have to be both. You can be both progressive and you can still be close to your faith. And it doesn't come without its criticism. It doesn't come without its critics. But I think it takes a strong person to do that. And I think Hannah's doing a great job. And I'm really proud of her as a fan. That she is doing that. And I'm sure it's not easy, and certainly she's had her critics, but I think as she sticks with it and continues to be her authentic self, it's going to pay off, and I think she's been a good role model for young women.
Nick, can I ask you a selfish question? I just want to see more of your handsome face. Is there any way, can we lose a little of your headroom at the top there and get more of Nick?
Need?
There we go. There's a little more of Nick. All right, I love it. Thank you.
I'm holding it, so.
We want less of the whale, more of your amazing hair. Because I love your hair. You have great hair. Tilt it down just a little more for me. Like a little more. There we go, Nick. I love it. Okay, so sex and religion like never before. I want to ask you, why do you think that is? Are there those conversations that might have happened more in the past but have wound up on the editing room floor? It seems like they're airing more of the sex and religion discussions than ever before this season, I guess because of Hannah and Luke P.
I think there's a couple variables. I think one, the show has already talked about it a little bit, so they've broken those barriers. And two, it also depends on if it's a conversation that's happening with the lead and its contestants. Hannah's been open about her faith. Obviously, Luke's talked about meeting God in the shower, and so that's going to be a conversation. And with religion and sex, sometimes there's some conversations that happen, and sometimes in a judgmental or shameful way. But that's come up. But Hannah's also decided to be her most authentic self, and maybe not feel afraid to kind of be intimate and also be honest, not only with it seems to be Luke, but the audience, obviously, because whatever she says is going to be aired. And I think, yeah, I think it makes great TV, so the show's going to air it. But I think it's a little bit of both, the show willing to show it and they're talking about it.
So when you hear Hannah say, I effed in a windmill, my first thought is, it's amazing. I applaud her. And this is going to become an iconic moment in Bachelor Nation history.
Yeah, and I think at first she will probably feel like she has more critics than support, because critics tend to be louder. I think over time, as much as maybe the phrase will be iconic and fun to say and joke around about, I think she'll be thought of very positively, and as someone who has been an influence to young women who especially come from a conservative household, who sometimes feel shame about the truth is, people are having sex. Millennials are having sex. People are getting married later in life. They're not waiting to have sex, and they're still religious and have a strong faith. And sometimes I feel like they have to hide it and not talk about it. And I think Hannah is kind of using this platform, whether on purpose or just being authentic, to show that maybe you can do both and not necessarily be judged or shamed.
Do you think, though, that the Bachelorettes tend to get shamed a little bit more if they talk about sex on the show? I know Caitlin Bristow's. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, when obviously, Caitlin and I, they showed kind of intimate moments with that went down, and Caitlin got a lot of grief for that, and it wasn't okay. And I think, yeah, I think it still absolutely happens to this day, where the expectation is that men can do it, and if women do it, even if people talk about it, it's not okay. This is really weird to watch.
Sorry.
Anyway,
they had that B-roll ready.
I'm sure they did. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like things like this are only going to happen over time, and when people willing to talk about it more and more, and hopefully someday we'll get to a point where we're not being judged. And by we, I mean, specifically women who are as open and sex positive as men have been allowed to be over the years.
Well, we talked a little bit about you and Caitlin just then, and you guys I remember you very famously went behind a door, and then we heard some audio. And I do want to ask you about Hannah and this windmill thing, because there is just something, no one would have seen it coming that she would say a windmill. There's all this analysis now about, well, she spent some time in the Netherlands and there's windmills there. Coming up, we know she'll be in Greece and there's windmills there. Let me ask you, is it possible that she snuck off with a guy into a windmill and that wasn't caught on camera? Or as the leader, the camera's following you around all the time?
I guess anything's possible, but highly unlikely. My guess is that production would have known about this, and my gut tells me this will probably happen in the week of Fantasy Suites weeks. I doubt, next week's hometowns, right? So they're not gonna. I doubt they're gonna get time to sneak away with meeting family to go have sex in a windmill. That's my gut, and if it had happened, I very much doubt that they would have done it this week. That production would have been unaware of it. And then Hannah, keep in mind, would have then had to admit it not only to the cameras, but to production, which I'm sure she probably wouldn't. It wouldn't be easy for her to do. So my guess is that it hasn't happened. It will probably happen the week of Fantasy Suite. And I look forward to finding out who it is, because it doesn't seem to be Luke.
It's definitely not Luke. Yeah, there's all this speculation. Is it Peter? She has said their chemistry is a 10 out of 10. Is it Jed? They said they were falling in love with each other. Is it Tyler? Do you have a guess? What's your inclination?
My guess is, I think Tyler always has these strong showings. Peter, I almost feel like Peter's a distant third or fourth to Tyler and Jed. Jed I think her relationship with Jed last night looks stronger than maybe the rest, especially with the Luke drama. So I would say Tyler or Jed. But it's interesting just with the Luke stuff, because there's nothing wrong, especially in this process. Every cast member worries about the lead they're falling in love with and whether they've been intimate with other people. What's interesting about Luke is that I think it's a normal thing to start falling in love with someone and not want them to have sex with someone else. But the problem with Luke is he's done nothing but kind of gaslight Hannah and shame Hannah with almost everything she's done. So now that at this point, it's almost like icing on the cake.
Yeah, that
Um,
does seem like a normal topic of conversation that the contestants would worry or wonder or feel a bit of jealousy
yeah.
thinking about whether the lead had hooked up with someone
I'm
else.
I'm curious if there's, obviously we were seeing a clip, so I'm curious if there's more to what Luke might have said, because maybe he said something more. But what's interesting, like I said, just based on what we saw, I mean, it just sounds like he's like, listen, if you did that, that's fine. I want to remove myself, and he's entitled to say that, and that's not necessarily shaming Hannah, but he has done nothing but shame Hannah. And if he said more things to make her feel judged, and that's the thing, Luke has a tendency of always saying that one thing that's, it's not saying, hey, listen, agree to disagree. It's making her feel shamed. It's making her like, Hannah doesn't owe it to
Judged,
Luke.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and Hannah doesn't owe it to Luke to do things to, he speaks in terms of like doing your actions in terms of, the person, the husband you're going to marry should be proud of you. Like there's a lot of guys out there who, like, for example, Tyler has been very outwardly supportive of being kind of progressive and sex positive, and that maybe a realist that the person you end up with, while not ideal, might have a past.
Hmm.
And so it's all very interesting dynamic.
I know,
But
and it's
I
creating
just don't
such interesting conversations again about that line, that crossing and intersection of sex and religion, because I'm with you in that, like, Luke's entitled to uh his own opinions, of course. We're not all going to agree with them, and at some point, someone's opinion can also just be flat out wrong. But is Luke crossing a line here, sort of an unwritten rule of the show, by even bringing that up with Hannah? I can't remember another time when I've necessarily seen someone, maybe you remember, but seen a contestant bring up with the lead whether they've hooked up with other people.
That's a good point. I can tell you from personal experience and talking to other cast members, it's something everyone worries about. Luke is the first person I can remember bringing it up, at least on camera. And it not isn't necessarily wrong, but like Luke again has done nothing but there's a difference of weighing. There's a difference between talking about it and saying, hey, listen, we're religious and sex is something that happens, but like, and I don't want you to feel judged and shamed, but this bothers me, versus making her feel judged and using phrases like, it's meant for a marriage, and if you do this, you're going against God's word or
Right.
something like that. That can really make someone feel shamed, and that part is not okay.
Can I ask you a logistical question?
Sure.
You and Caitlin famously went behind closed doors, not during fantasy suites. So this could potentially, we don't know yet if Hannah had this windmill moment during fantasy suites or not, but when you went behind that closed door for that, as Caitlin called it at the time, off-camera time, we heard some audio of you. Do
hmm
you, are you told to take your mics off? Were the mics in the room? How does that work in terms of you saying, we're
I
going to go have intimate time?
It's my understanding that there was audio planted there without us knowing, but I can't confirm that. But it was our understanding there was no audio in that room.
Oh, you mean the audio we heard between you and Caitlin was not actually audio from you guys in that room at that time?
No, what I'm saying is we were under the impression we took our mics off, and we were under the impression there was no other mics in the room. It's maybe that might not have been the case now that we have learned, if
Now
that
that you
makes sense.
have looked back. So there may have been a mic somewhere else in that room, but not on your person,
Yeah,
is what
like
you're saying.
maybe in a drawer under the bed or.
I see. And are you told there's no mics in here? Do you ask?
I think in the moment we don't really think about it. We took our mics off,
Yeah.
and that wasn't our primary concern at the time, and it wasn't necessarily something I think that we were expecting to go down. So you're very much in the moment in those situations, and they're also making good TV.
I asked Caitlin actually if she saw some similarities between her and Hannah. I see them because I think, they're both very memorably kind of outspoken, funny, in touch with their sexuality bachelorettes. Do you see the similarities between the
Yeah,
two of them?
I guess in a way I do. Specifically, I mean, there's some differences. I don't know. I can't. Hannah has been outward about her faith and religion, and Caitlin at least didn't speak to it, so I don't know about that. But at least just kind of that unfilteredness that they both seem to have, and kind of a speak first, think second kind of mentality. I think they both have a little bit, and I think that's why they were both. I mean, certainly, I think what will be interesting is I think Caitlyn now is viewed as a very popular and likable bachelorette, but in the moment she also got criticism. I think the kind of the same trajectory will happen for Hannah, where I think people really like her right now, but she also has gotten some criticism. I think fast forward 2 years, she'll be remembered as a very popular and likable and successful bachelorette.
Yeah, and the ratings have been big. I mean, it's been a captivating season. I'm trying
It's
to
been
think
great.
off the top of my head if there have been any bachelors who have like openly talked about having sex with a contestant. I'm really having a hard time remembering now.
Yeah, not as much. I mean, in my season, it wasn't. Obviously, I had the history on The Bachelorette, so I was a little cautious about it. Also, like, sex didn't really play a big role in my season. It wasn't really talked
Oh,
about.
wait, Nick, I just remembered this. But didn't they
What?
imply that you had given Raven? I really just remembered this. You went to
Yeah,
the fantasy suites with Raven and they implied that you had given her her first orgasm. But then you guys
they
later
did.
contradicted that.
I mean, I've been, yeah, we've both mentioned that in terms of sex, that only happened with Vanessa, but that's kind of been talked about. But that's all I really say about.
Well, and what are the unwritten rules on the show? I mean, because this windmill moment could be part of Fantasy Suites. And you've been part of a lot of those conversations. Like you know, on Andy Dorfman's season, you did say, well, you know, that you two had sex in the Fantasy Suites. What are the unwritten rules or rules that are advised to you, told to you about how to treat whether sex happens in the Fantasy Suite? Like, do you talk about it after? What's the right way to do it?
There's no rules. I mean, I think every season's different, and I think it's a different time than before. I think sex is thought of more positive now, even than 4 or 5 years ago. But even then, at the time, again, my goal was never to shame Andy, and I know even then she was judged for it, and that was kind of my fault to do it in the situation when I did it. But again, afterwards, there's nothing wrong with, and I know, like, for example, like. Josh Murray, you know, after Andy and Josh broke up, he was very, very critical and judgmental of Andy in terms of being intimate with other people. And again, he had the right to not want her to do that, but not the right to shame her for it. You know, and it's a tricky situation, but again, I applaud the franchise for keeping those conversations going. Because truthfully, the only way we'll get to a place where sex can be an open conversation, where people can feel freely about not only doing it, but doing it in an open dialogue where they're having discussions, not feel ashamed, is to put it out there, even though it might be uncomfortable at first. But yeah, I mean, the show is continuing to evolve, and it's fun to watch.
It is funny how that really wasn't that long ago, but the topics, the way that we approach it, and how much it is okay to talk about this stuff has changed a lot in the past, like you said, 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, I'm really glad.
I want to talk to you about a moment some people are getting into from last night that doesn't have to do with sex, but has to do with a different controversy, Jed. So Hannah tells Jed that she is falling in love with him. And his reaction, if you remember it, was, whoa, let me take that in.
First he was like, oh yeah, same.
What did you think of that moment?
I mean, listen, with all the stories that have happened about Jed with this supposed other girlfriend, and with the evidence out there, it's hard to watch Jed now and really believe anything he's saying. Again, you know, we talked about this on my podcast, shameless plug, that comes out tomorrow, that Lauren is my guest on.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who go on each season and are seeing people and dating while they're going through the casting process. And while, you know, there's a lot of like past stories and kind of like he said, she said moments of like, well, they broke up with me to go on the show. And not, you know, some of that's true and some of there's a lot of exaggeration there. This is a guy who supposedly, and there seems to be pretty strong evidence that not only did he had a girlfriend, he was in a committed relationship with this kind of mutual agreement with his girlfriend that he would go on the show. And that's a huge difference. And it seems like a small difference, but it's a significant difference than, like, say, Tasha, who last year had a guy she was kind of hanging out with, suggest that she broke up with him. And it's really hard to literally believe anything he's saying. And it just doesn't help that, like, every damn scene he's like playing a guitar. I really loved it when the guys kind of called it out that he didn't have, like, his guitar with him.
Yes.
It
They
was
said he's
really
not.
good. Yeah, I mean, it was that moment. It seemed like Jed was in control in a weird way. Hannah is kind of expressing to him about her feelings, and it was almost like she was a cast member again, and he was the bachelor, being like, "Oh, great, I feel that way too," you know. But meanwhile, I have to consider other people's feelings, and literally, it seems like he does because he had a girlfriend back at home, which is kind of a wild, wild thing.
It is so hard not to watch him through the lens of that knowledge. And I agree with you that there's a big difference between I broke up with someone not long before I went on the show, and I allegedly was continuing to date someone and told them I would date them when I came back, and that the show was all a farce. There's a big difference there.
Yeah, the reality is had Jed had this alleged girlfriend and literally, got cast and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but we're breaking up," this would really be a non-issue. It would be a non-story. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So it's a big deal. And as far as I'm concerned, after this episode, he's the front runner. So I think
Jed is.
Yeah, I mean, Luke's falling back, and it sounds like, based off the previews, that Luke gets sent home. And
yeah, we see her flipping him off in a limo, which makes me think.
So Tyler's a fan favorite, and he's charming, and he's good looking, but, like, the connection, at least after this episode, I mean, I would call Jed my front runner. So that makes it that much more compelling, but also sad for Hannah's sake.
Yeah, if they end up together, it will be maybe the most highly anticipated after the final rose special in years, because we're going to want to see what they have to say. Yeah. I want to ask you how significant you think it was, and maybe this is part of why you think Jed's a front runner or the front runner, but it was telling to me that Hannah told him, "I'm falling in love with you." We'd seen other guys, Garrett tell Hannah he's falling for her, Tyler, but Hannah said it first to Jed.
Yeah, that's true. That is rare. That is rare. I mean, I said it to Vanessa, but I'm pretty sure Vanessa said it to me first, and I said it to Rachel as well, but that was after she said it to me. So yeah, it's definitely unique.
And there was a moment, too, when Hannah and Jed were talking, and she told him, "Well, I'll be with the other guys, and I'll think Jed's over here." And I thought, oh, wow, she basically just told him she's thinking about him when she's with the other guys.
Yeah, no, that was a big deal. And it doesn't often happen. And you don't – that's what I mean. Like, that was Jed's time with Hannah, it was, to me, significantly different than all her other times. I think she was almost, like, in the safest possible way, letting Jed know that he really could be the one, and she wanted to know where Jed's head's at. I think that was an interesting dynamic, because people assume that the lead's always in control, and it's kind of like, as long as the lead wants you, you'll want them. I can tell you from personal experience that's not always the case. There's always a lot of fear as the Bachelor or Bachelorette, that if you start developing really feelings for someone, will they return the favor? And so for Hannah to kind of check in with Jed's feelings, I think is very telling.
So if you think Jed is the front runner, then who is your pick for Bachelor right now? We had 3 guys go home last night. What do you think?
I mean, I know Mike's gotten a lot of love, and I really like Mike, and I think, certainly it's long overdue to have the first, Black Bachelor, and or just a person of color, quite frankly. If I'm just looking it through the lens of without considering ethnicity or race, I think Mike's really compelling, but I think Tyler and Peter have more compelling storylines and are going to go further. So I think it's going to be challenging just looking at that. But I think I would love it for Mike to be, and obviously Tyler. I mean, everyone seems to be on the Tyler train, and people seem to really like Pete. And if Jed doesn't win, I don't see obviously that as an option. And And, certainly not Luke, so.
Well, Nick, I have to switch gears back to this, but I just got a text that I have to ask you this question. If you do, as the lead or as a contestant, want this off-camera time, do you got to go tell producers, hey, I want to make this happen, or does it just happen?
You can. I mean, everything's negotiable. You can always ask. It's just like in life. They probably won't allow that. I mean, again, keep in mind they're making a show, right? So the only way to make that you're going to want the most compelling things to be caught on camera, and that is why sometimes a lot of the rules of what's out there of no phones and curfews, a lot of it has to do with making sure that anything that happens gets caught on tape because from an audience standpoint, if it's not caught on tape, it's hard to show, then it's hard to explain. The reason why they do those morning after the fantasy suite dates, for those of you who watched Chris Soules' season, is, Becca pulled Chris aside or Chris pulled Becca aside or something. And there was apparently something happened, an awkward moment that wasn't really caught the morning after. And I think that really leaves the audience confused. And so that's why I think production is always, for the audience's sake, trying to capture everything. So it's much easier just to show them than try to have people explain things and leave out details.
Well, I am very excited to see how much we will see of the windmill, of the 2 times in the windmill.
My gut tells me we won't actually see the action go down because it was probably just another fantasy suite date was my guess. But
okay.
It sounds like we'll get some details from Hannah that we don't usually get.
Nick Viall, thank you so much for being here. Guys, check out Nick's podcast, The Viall Files. It is so good. He has amazing guests on it. He's had Hannah Brown herself on it, and I am this week's guest. So thank you, Nick. I love that we did this back and forth this week.
You were very entertaining, yeah.
Oh, well, so are you, my friend. We've got so much more for you guys coming up here on ET Live, so don't go anywhere. Plus, Roses and Rosé, our full episode recap will be up on YouTube later today. And watch The Bachelorette every Monday night on ABC. It is one of my favorite seasons in a long time. Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.